Fellas, this week, Khalil Rountree returns against Jamahal Hill in a card that I want to say is a pretty solid fight night, but after what we just had last weekend, you can never be too sure about some of these fight night cards. But if I had to rate the card out of 10, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 for a fight night. It's a pretty solid card, some good names, some good prospects. Makes sense how they've built the card, but again, after what we just had last weekend with Usman and Buckley and how bad that card was, you can never be too sure. But we'll go in there with the first fight. Irna, Alekseeva versus Klaudia Sygula. Now, Alekseeva went 4-1 in the regional scene, had a pretty good run, then missed weight by 5 rounds and did some weird dance as soon as she got to the UFC. Ended up getting a finish against Stephanie Egger in a UFC debut, but recently lost to Melissa Mullins, who is going to be featured a lot on this card because so many people fought Melissa Mullins on this card in a most recent fight. Taking on Klaudia Sygula, who had an also pretty good run in the regional scene, but there was a lot of questionable kind of fights on there, like modified MMA. She also had a bare knuckle MMA fight, and like I said before, a couple of these dodgy fights that wasn't really professional fights, and she got demolished by Melissa Mullins in a most recent fight in the UFC. If we had to look at the styles of both of them, Alekseeva's style is an offensive grappling approach, comes from a bit of a judoka background, looks to take the fight to the mat and submit her opponent, heavy grappler, and she's not the prettiest on the feet, but she's going to be taking on Sygula, who is a pretty solid striker, but her grappling's awful. Again, it's kind of hard to gauge how good she is. She looked awful on the regional scene. She didn't look awful, but she's facing lower level fighters, and she has absolute god-awful grappling, and for that reason, I'm going to go with Irna Alekseeva by submission in the first round. I don't usually pick women MMA fights when in a stoppage, but I feel like this is bound to happen. Alekseeva is a pretty good submission artist. I know she's been very inactive. She's been out for quite some time, but clearly comes from a bit of a grappling background, has a couple of submissions on the regional scene, submitted Stephanie Egger as an underdog in a UFC debut, and Sygula, her grappling is awful. I don't think she's UFC worthy. Has a bit of a fraudulent record outside the UFC, and even in that fight with Melissa Mullins, she got manhandled by Melissa Mullins and looked like she had no place being in there. She's too pretty to be doing MMA. Alekseeva gets this one done, submission in the first round. I think she takes it down, gets the sub, and gets back in the winning column. Then we've got Seukyon versus Oban Elliott. Now, Seukyon was a Sambo champion. I think he's the first Korean Sambo champion in the world. Had a pretty solid run in the regional scene, becoming a champion in some organizations, and also just came from the Contender Series where he won in the Contender Series. Taking on Oban Elliott, who also had a pretty solid run in Cage Warriors. Won his UFC debut against the glorious Val Woodburn. Then he beats Preston Parsons, and in his most recent fight, knocks out Basil Hafez in his most recent fight at UFC 309. He was supposed to fight a couple of weeks ago against Brahimaj, but that ended up getting kind of fiddled about, and now he's on this card against Seukyon. Now, the style of both of them, Seukyon comes from a bit of a grappling background, but he has a bit of a pressure boxing style in MMA. We saw this on the Contender Series. Even though he definitely has Sambo in his back locker, he kind of has a pressure boxing approach where he likes to use his hands. And for Oban Elliott, he's a fairly well-rounded dude. He can do everything, but he usually does have a bit of a control-heavy grappling approach. We saw in the fight with Val Woodburn and Preston Parsons, his game plan a lot of the time does kind of be holding people against the cage, looking to take them down, doesn't have the best finishing ability, and he isn't outstanding anywhere, but he mixes things up really, really well. I know he just knocked out Basil Hafez, but Basil Hafez, apart from that performance against JDM, isn't the highest level fighter, but I'm going to be going with Oban Elliott to win this one by decision, and I think that's a respectable pick. 3-fight winning streak, well, bigger than a 3-fight winning streak, but 3-0 in the UFC, and obviously Seukyon is making his UFC debut. And Oban Elliott, he's a pretty solid fighter, man. He's got a bit of charisma about him, and like I said, very well-rounded guy, manages to get it done every time. He doesn't look outstanding everywhere the fight goes. I don't think he's going to be the next big thing. I think once he reaches the top 15, that's kind of going to be his limit, but I think in this fight with Seukyon, I don't really see Seukyon having a massive key to victory in this fight. If he keeps the fight standing, I think Oban Elliott's striking is improved to the point where he's probably going to be able to keep it, or win the fight on the feet. And when it comes to grappling, Oban Elliott's a solid grappler, shown in a couple of his fights. I think he'll win the grappling exchanges. I mean, we saw him against Preston Parsons. Preston Parsons, a high-level grappler, and Oban Elliott was able to kind of nullify that. It was a bit of holding him against the cage, but he was able to nullify that and get the job done. So I think Oban Elliott's going to get this one done. 4-0 in the UFC, beat Seukyon, but I don't think he gets to finish. Not really a big finisher is Oban Elliott. I know we just knocked out Basil Hafez. Previous to that, it was on like a 5-fight winning streak of straight decisions. So Oban Elliott by decision is my pick. Then we've got, I mean, this is just peak MMA. Mohammad Usman versus Hamdy Abdelwahab. Now, Mohammad Usman obviously is the brother of none other than Mr. Kamaru Usman, who just had an impressive win last week. He had a pretty solid run in the regional scene, losing to Dontel Mayes, got demolished in PFL, and then comes over to the Ultimate Fighter. Now, he has a good run in the Ultimate Fighter, goes 3-0, ends up winning the whole tournament, wins his UFC debut. I think he was against Jake Collier. No, he won against I forgot who he debuted against. I think it was Tafa, and then his second fight in the UFC against Jake Collier, where he won that. But now he's 0-2 in his last two, losing to Thomas Peterson and Mick Parkin in two pretty close fights, but he still ended up losing. He's going to be taking on Hamdy Abdelwahab, who comes from a Greco-Roman wrestling background, actually competed in Greco-Roman Olympics. He had a pretty solid start to his MMA career. He did bare knuckle MMA, where he finished his fights in like 30 seconds, and then had 3 MMA fights, where again he was finishing his fights super quick. Comes over to the UFC, has a fun one fight where he beat Dontel Mayers, but he ended up taking steroids, so that ended up getting overturned to a no contest. In his most recent fight, he beat Jamal Pogs in a very controversial decision. If I had to break down the styles, Mohammad Usman's style is more of a control wrestler, kind of similar to his brother Kamaru Usman. He likes taking people down and kind of controlling them with the wrestling, and he does have striking. He's not a fish out of water on the feet, but it's nothing high level. You know, it's just an average unranked, you know, heavyweight. He usually has the range and the size over a lot of these heavyweights, who is kind of able to get going with his striking, but again, it isn't particularly high level. Anybody with a decent kickboxing background will be able to outstrike Mohammad Usman. And for Hamdy Abdelwahab, it's a Greco-Roman wrestler who's fallen in love with styles. Yeah, he has a Greco-Roman wrestling Olympic background, but he doesn't really seem to use it in MMA. I mean, in his most recent fight with Jamal Pogs, he kept the fight standing and kind of just tried striking with him. He threw like one strike every round, didn't really shoot any takedowns, which was quite confusing. But I'm going to be going with, I think, the underdog, Mohammad Usman, to win this fight. Yeah, Hamdy Abdelwahab has not impressed me so far in the UFC, and Mohammad Usman, obviously, his brother just won last week, and he's 2-2 in the UFC. The win over Thomas Peterson and Mick Parkin were two very close fights that could have gone either way. I actually thought he won the fight with Mick Parkin, who's now in the top 15, and I just think he's a lot more well-rounded than Hamdy Abdelwahab. I think Hamdy Abdelwahab is definitely the more dangerous fighter, but from a striking perspective, I can see Mohammad Usman being able to outstrike him. We saw Jamal Pogs pretty much do that to Hamdy Abdelwahab, and I just don't really trust that Abdelwahab's going to shoot the takedowns. He didn't do it against Jamal Pogs, didn't really do it too much against Dontel Mayers, and I think Mohammad Usman's got a pretty decent grappling background enough to the point where he's going to be able to kind of nullify that and keep the fight standing. Close fight, unranked heavyweights, anything can happen. I'm leaning towards Mohammad Usman getting this one done. I think his performances, and he's, like I said, he's got the experience in the UFC. What, 4-5 fights in the UFC compared to Abdelwahab's 2. Both of them were pretty poor performances, so I'm going to go Mohammad Usman by decision. Then we've got Darya Zheleznyakova versus Melissa Mullins. Now, Darya had, again, a pretty solid run in the regional scene, actually lost to Melissa Mullins there as well. Ended up getting finished by Melissa Mullins back in 2022. And so far in the UFC, she's 1-1, and she just got submitted and twerked on by Perez. Going to be taking on Melissa Mullins, who had a good run on the regional scene, went 5-0 like I just said, beat Darya, managed to become a champion in the regional scene, ended up winning her UFC debut against that Russian girl we were on about earlier. Then she loses to Nora Connolly in the next fight by finish, and she just dominated Sygula in her most recent fight back in, I think it was November or whatever month it was. But if we have to break down the styles, Darya's style is kind of just winning fights by picking people apart from the get-go. She likes to keep the fight standing and pick people apart, but she has Darren Till levels of grappling. Again, like I said with Sygula, her grappling isn't very good. She isn't really good at getting back up, and she's facing Melissa Mullins, who likes to take people down and beat the fuck out of them with ground and pound. Really good grappler is Melissa Mullins, and she's a bit of a dogfighter. Again, kind of questionable striking, but from what we've seen from Darya and what we've seen from Melissa Mullins, this seems stylistically a very favourable matchup for Melissa Mullins, so I'm going to go Melissa Mullins to win this one by decision. I think she takes down Darya, probably controls her across 3 rounds, could even get another finish because of how bad stylistically it is for Darya, but I'm going to go with Melissa Mullins, takes her down round after round, probably beats her with ground and pound, deals some damage, and just rides out the win across 15 minutes. Darya's key to victory in this fight is pretty much just, you know, keep the fight standing and pick her apart, but she wasn't able to do it against Eileen Perez. And I know Eileen Perez now is on a good run, but on top of that, for Melissa Mullins, you look at her only loss, Nora Connolly. Nora Connolly's on a roll right now. I think she's on like a big winning streak, and she just beat that Leon Edwards lookalike, whoever, I forgot her name, but she just won recently as well. So I'm going to go Melissa Mullins by decision to beat Darya Zheleznyakova. Takes the fight to the mat, beats her with ground and pound, either gets a finish by TKO or rides out a decision win. Then we've got Ismael Naurdiev versus Jong Park. Now, Naurdiev had a massive run in the regional scene before the UFC, and he actually had a run in the UFC back from 2019 to 2020, going 2-2, ended up losing to Sean Brady in his last fight. Since then, he had a pretty poor run in the regional scene, but he ended up getting a finish in Brave, so he comes back to the UFC against Bruno Silva, beat Bruno Silva in a pretty one-sided fight as he takes on Jong Park, who again had a solid run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, ended up losing to Shavkat Rakhmonov on the regional scene too. Went 3-0 by decision in his first 3 UFC fights, got finished by Gregory Rodriguez. After that, gets 4 wins in the UFC, with 3 of them coming by finish or by rear naked choke. Then he ends up losing to, what's his name? I forgot his name. Andre Muniz. And then after that, in his most recent fight, he picked up a win over Brad Tavares last year. Naurdiev's style is kind of just, he's very well-rounded, but he's not particularly great anywhere. Like, he just fought Bruno Silva in probably the easiest version of Bruno Silva to fight, and he looked great everywhere. He looked good everywhere, but not particularly great anywhere. Like, he's got decent striking, decent grappling, doesn't really stand out anywhere the fight goes, and he usually likes to get people on the back foot, leading with the grappling. That's what we just saw in the fight with the Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva was always against the cage. Naurdiev was implementing the grappling. That's kind of his style. It is a grappling, I guess, heavy approach, but he is more well-rounded. And for Jung Young Park, it's just suffocating grappling pressure. He likes to wear you out with the grappling, take you down and beat you with ground and pound, or just get the submission. Decent submission artist, one of the better unranked middleweight, one of the better unranked middleweights. Just dominated Brad Tavares across 15 minutes with the grappling. His boxing isn't that bad as well. I'm going to go with Jung Young Park to win this one by decision. I think this is a pretty comfortable fight for Jung Young Park. I see him winning the exchanges on the feet. He's a better boxer. He's got a decent jab as well. There's Jung Young Park. So I can see him winning the striking exchanges with Naurdiev. And when it comes to grappling, I just think he's a better grappler than Naurdiev. You know, I think he's got more, he's got better submission ability. He's got better wrestling than Naurdiev. I don't really rate Naurdiev too much. And like I said, he's coming back into the UFC. And he's barely had a run in the regional scene. And you look at Jung Young Park, he's been running through people. He's only losses to Andre Muniz, who stylistically isn't really a favorable matchup because of the BJJ of Muniz. So I think Jung Young Park gets this one done. Solid decision, beats him with the grappling, and if the fight does cancel out and stay on the feet, he's a much better striker than Naurdiev. I'm going Jung Young Park to win this one by decision. Tagir Ulanbekov. He's going to be taking on Azat Maksum. Was supposed to be Horiguchi, which was going to be, I guess... You know what? People are complaining, but I'm glad that we're not seeing Horiguchi versus Ulanbekov. He deserves somebody much higher than that. But Tagir Ulanbekov, kind of part of that Khabib crew with Makhachev and Umar and all those guys. Probably one of the weaker guys from that crew. And he's never TKO'd anybody in his entire career, so you can kind of guess what style he's got. Had a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion on the local scene. Managed to get wins over Azuel Mabayev and also lost to Zaglas Umagulov, the Asian Paddy Pimblett. And so far in the UFC, he's been in a nice little run. Did lose to Tim Elliott at one point, but apart from that, he's looked pretty good in all of his wins. As he takes on Azat Maksum, who again had a huge run on the regional scene, becoming a champion and was once a big 125 prospect. Won a controversial decision in his UFC debut, but recently lost to Charles Johnson in his last fight by, again, decision. So if I had to break down the styles, Tagir Ulanbekov's style is that classic Dagestani pressure grappling style. He likes to beat opponents with control time and heavy wrestling, and he looks to snap submissions in the process. We just saw it against Clayton Carpenter. He likes to take the fight to the mat and kind of just dominate opponents with the wrestling, get the control time, keep the dominant positions, and if there is a submission to take, he will snatch up the submission and submit his opponents, usually by some sort of choke. And for Azat Maksum, he likes to utilize boxing. He's got pretty quick hands for the flyweight division. He's got solid boxing, but again, similar to Ulanbekov, ultimately looks to grapple and find submissions early. He doesn't really like to waste too much time on the ground. If he is going to take you down, he wants to look to finish the fight with submission, get back up and work you with the striking. But I'm going to go with Ulanbekov to win this one by decision. If I'm being honest, I do think Ulanbekov deserves somebody kind of higher ranked than Azat Maksum. He is one of the better, I guess, up and comers in the flyweight division. I know he lost to Tim Elliott a few years ago, but he's looked impressive in all of his fights. I mean, he just fought Clayton Carpenter, who's a stylistically a bad fight for Tagir Ulanbekov. Carpenter's got sharp boxing. I think he's got some sort of Golden Gloves background in boxing, and he's also a great wrestler. We just saw Ulanbekov kind of cancel out the grappling of Clayton Carpenter, one of the best wrestlers in this division. Not saying he's ever going to be a future champion, but I think Azat Maksum, who has had he's lost to Charles Johnson. He had a very controversial win over Tyson Nam. Bit of a regional warrior, looks good on the regional scene, comes over to the UFC, doesn't look as good. I think Ulanbekov gets this one done, takes down Azat Maksum, just deals, controls him with the grappling, doesn't get the fight done by finish, but I just think he's going to do it similar to what he did against Carpenter, win via control time, and kind of just smother Azat Maksum. Then we've got Mohammad Naimov versus Bogdan Grad. Mohammad Naimov used to be a champion in Taekwondo before MMA, and he had a pretty solid run on the regional scene, pretty much going undefeated. Ended up losing on his first stint at the Contender Series, so he goes back to the regional scene, goes 3-1 in the regional scene, knocks out Jamie Mullarkey in his UFC debut, had a fluky win against Nathaniel Wood where he won the fight, but he cheated about 50 times in that fight, and the referee didn't do anything about it. Then he ended up getting a good win over Eric Silva, gets submitted by Felipe Lima, and he's coming off a win over Khan Orfley in his most recent fight. Going to be taking on Bogdan Grad, who had another solid run in the regional scene, also ended up losing on his first stint on the Contender Series by knockout, comes back, gets 2 more finishes on the regional scene, wins on the Contender Series again, and just finished Lucas Alexander in his most recent fight in the UFC. If we had to break down the styles, Mohammad Naimov likes to beat opponents with the striking. Like I said, comes from a Taekwondo background, pretty quick on the feet with his striking. If not, he likes to hold you against the cage if you are the superior striker. So he has got a pretty good game plan, and he is a pretty physically imposing grappler, quite strong frame, does Mohammad Naimov. And for Bogdan Grad, it's just pure aggression, in your face, walking forward. He is an awful striker though, very hittable. We've seen him get KO'd on the Contender Series. His striking is very dodgy, and I do feel like he's definitely inferior on the feet in this fight. And he does look to grapple at a high pace. We saw it in the fight with Lucas Alexander, just completely wore Alexander out and got the job done by ground and pound. I'm going to be going with Mohammad Naimov to get this one done by decision. I think Naimov dominates this fight. This is a very favourable matchup for Mohammad Naimov. Bit of a step down in competition. I think he completely dominates Bogdan Grad in this fight on the feet. Could even get a knockout as well. You know, he's a pretty quick striker. Is Naimov. I think if he lands the right shot, he could definitely, well, he definitely has the capabilities to knock out Bogdan Grad, who has terrible defense. So I would definitely be going with Naimov by some sort of KO, or at least a dominating decision. And when it comes to grappling, Bogdan Grad lacks to utilize the grappling, but he's not like, he isn't necessarily like a, you know, known for his insane grappling. I think Naimov probably the better grappler out of the two of them. Physically imposing, was able to kind of hold that Nathaniel Wood against the cage. So I'm going to go Mohammad Naimov by decision. Wins this fight comfortably in the striking. Probably drops Bogdan Grad, could even get a finish, but he's just a much better fighter. I'm going to go Naimov by decision. And then we've got Nazim Sadykhov against Nikolas Motta. This is going to be a banger. Nazim Sadykhov ended up losing his professional debut by finish, but then after that went on a huge winning streak, the majority of them being by finish. Ends up getting a good win in the Contender Series, ends up finishing Evan Elder in his next fight in what was a banger. Then he ends up going out there and finishing Terence McKinney. Has a draw with Borshev, and in his most recent fight, he beat Gabriel Bonfim by finish as well. So, dangerous dude. Going to be taking on Nikolas Motta, who also had a pretty solid run in the regional scene with a lot of finishes. Comes over from the Ultimate Fighter, ends up losing on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. After that, goes on a bit of a run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Gets thrown in the Contender Series by decision, and since then, he's had a pretty up and down run in the UFC. He's had a couple of good wins, like when he was able to beat Cameron Van Camp and Tom Nolan, but he's also taken a few losses, like when he debuted on short notice to Jim Miller and when he lost to Manuel Torres. The style of Nazim Sadykhov is a rangy kickboxer who blasts kicks. Nazim Sadykhov is one of these fighters where he puts all into every shot that he throws. Very kind of snappy kickboxer, likes to use the kicks a lot, pressure heavy style, likes to back you against the cage, and he has got dodgy defense though. He is quite a hittable fighter, is Nazim Sadykhov. We saw that in the fight with Borshev. He's quite a hittable fighter, but he is kind of, at base, kind of like a blasty, rangy kickboxer. And he has got decent wrestling too. And for Nikolas Motta, he's like a stocky, explosive puncher. He likes to use a lot of his boxing. He's a crisp boxer. Who, like I just said, is explosive and a bit of a powerful puncher. Does lack takedown defense and striking defense. Not that there's going to be much grappling in this fight, but I'm going to go with Nazim Sadykhov to win this one by TKO in the first round. I don't see this fight going the distance. Two very dangerous guys. Dangerous boxer, dangerous kickboxer. But I just think Nazim Sadykhov is much better. You know, he's been in an absolute role in the UFC. We've seen Nikolas Motta get finished a few times. I do question the chin of Nikolas Motta. And I feel like for Nazim Sadykhov, it's kind of like a more stylistically favorable matchup. You know, he's got the range, he's got the size. I know we kind of see a trend of these lanky strikers in the lightweight division getting put out. I mean, we just saw it with Nikolas Motta and Tom Nolan, but I trust that Sadykhov's going to get this one done. Better kickboxer, keeps the range, lands the big shot on Nikolas Motta, and I think he's going to get this job, get the job done by TKO in the first round. But whoever wins, don't see it going the distance. I just think Nazim Sadykhov's the better striker, much more potential, and I think he clips Nikolas Motta in this fight and finishes Nikolas Motta in the first round by some sort of TKO. Then we've got Myktybek Orolbai against the long-awaited debut of Toyik Musayev. Now, Myktybek Orolbai, great run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Got a good submission win against Uros Medic in his UFC debut. Then he ends up beating Elvis Brenner in his next fight. Then he has an absolute fight of the year contender last year against Matej Rumbetsky in one of the best fights of 2024. Ultimately ends up losing that fight, but he's now coming back against Toyik Musayev, who is a KO machine, big prospects outside the UFC. Had a bit of a dodgy start to his MMA career, but after that goes on a huge winning streak, managed to become a champion in Ryzen, competed in Bellator a few times, managed to beat Patricky Pitbull as well to become the champion. And since then, he's had a bit of a good run, 3-2 in his last couple of fights, but he has been out since November of 2023, and he is now 35 years old, but he's still a big prospect. Myktybek Orolbai's style is smother wrestling, looks to maul. I remember when people were calling him the lightweight Hamzat Chimaev. He kind of has that smother wrestling approach, takes you down, likes to smother you with the wrestling and look for submissions, and he does usually gas out due to his heavy pace and pressure. I feel like Myktybek Orolbai is one of these fighters where he doesn't really have the gas tank for his fighting style. He fights like a Chimaev, he fights like a Merab, but he doesn't have the gas tank to go with it, and he usually ends up gassing out. Toyik Musayev, he has got a bit of a boxing style, looks to get the fight done by KO early, and he usually does display solid takedown defensive in all of his fights as well. Does Musayev, so he's a pretty solid striker, a bit of a striker versus grappler matchup. I'm going to go with Myktybek Orolbai by decision. I don't really trust and rate these fighters outside the UFC anymore. With what we've seen with Pachimix and Patricio Pitbull recently, I've got to go with Myktybek Orolbai to win this one. He was still once a really good lightweight prospect. I'm expecting him to come back with a really good grappling base in this fight. I do see a world where Myktybek Orolbai gets chinned with Sintoik Mosayev chin people outside the UFC, and Myktybek Orolbai is very hittable on the feet. But I just think he's going to completely kind of nullify anything by Toik Mosayev with the grappling. And on top of that, Toik Mosayev, he's lost a couple of his recent fights outside the UFC. He's 35 years old. He's been out since November of 2023. He's not in his prime. So I'm going to go with Myktybek Orolbai, the more fresh fighter, the guy who's won against decent opponents in the UFC and just had a fight of the year contender to beat Toik Mosayev. Gets him with the grappling, holds him against the cage, takes him down, deals some damage with ground and pound. I think he's going to be a bit of a banger. So I think Orolbai gets this one done by decision. He's just a better fighter, unless some sort of Hail Mary KO comes in the way of Toik Mosayev as he sleeps Myktybek Orolbai, which I don't think is going to happen because we just saw Orolbai have a pretty solid chin against Rumbetski and, you know, displayed amazing heart. I'm going to go Myktybek Orolbai to get this one done by decision. And then we've got the fight that the UFC are hell-bent on scheduling. They've scheduled this fight like 3 different times. Curtis Blades, the UFC veteran who just fought for a belt, against debuting Rizvan Kuniev. Talk about Dagestani privilege. Now, Rizvan Kuniev had a good run on the regional scene, the majority of them being finishers, managed to become a champion as well on Eagle FC. Got a finish on the Contender Series a few years ago, but didn't get a UFC contract. He then went and fought Ferreira, the Francis Ngannou opponent in PFL, and ended up beating Renan Ferreira in that fight, but he ended up taking every steroid in the book, and that ended up being overturned to a no contest. He then goes back to the Contender Series, gets another good finish on the Contender Series, and now he's making his UFC debut against Curtis Blades, who comes from a wrestling background, a collegiate wrestling background as Curtis Blades, and he's been in the top 5 of the heavyweight division for 6 years. Since 2018, he has not left the top 5 of this division. Bit of a gatekeeper for the top 5. He has notable wins over some guys like Alexander Volkov, Jelton Almeida, and just some other legends in the heavyweight division. So he's got a decent resume at heavyweight, but he's also got some notable losses, mainly against power punchers in Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, Sergey Pavlovich, and most recently Tom Aspinall, where he knocked out by Tom Aspinall in his most recent fight for the interim belt at UFC 304. Curtis Blades' style is a control wrestler with vicious ground and pound. Even though we haven't really seen this style in a while because he's kind of inactive and he hasn't really been able to display it, his style at base is control wrestling. Take you down to the mat, keep you on the ground for as long as possible, control you with wrestling, and kind of get that vicious ground and pound. We saw in that fight with Alistair Overeem, brutal ground and pound from Curtis Blades. He cannot take huge hits. Now, to be fair to him, he has only really lost to the most powerful guys in this division, but he's kind of a reoccurring theme that Curtis Blades doesn't really have the best chin, and he has a kind of like surprisingly explosive as well. We saw in that fight with Aspinall, he's got range, and he was tagging Tom Aspinall on the feet. He's actually quite surprisingly accurate on the feet, and he is quite explosive. Against Rizvan Kuniev, who's an effective wrestler, we saw this in the fight with Renan Ferreira, but he's not exactly dangerous with the wrestling, and he does have pretty solid striking. His taekwondo is pretty good for the heavyweight division. I'd actually say he's probably a better striker than Curtis Blades, but I've got to go with my boy Curtis Blades to get this one done by TKO in the second round. Rizvan Kuniev coming over to the UFC, you're putting him in the shark against Curtis Blades, who's been in the top 5 of this division for the longest time, had some pretty notable wins. I see Curtis Blades dominating Rizvan Kuniev. I think he beats him with the wrestling, takes him down, and just dominates him with the ground and pound and wears him out. Making your UFC debut against Curtis Blades is never an easy thing to do. I know it's the heavyweight division and anything can happen, but Rizvan Kuniev's looked great against terrible opponents. I know he beat Renan Ferreira, but it wasn't like he dominated Renan Ferreira. It was a bit of a grappling back and forth fight. Even Renan Ferreira was able to get dominant position with the grappling in their fight. I think Curtis Blades dominates him with the wrestling, takes him down, bullies him with ground and pound, and eventually within the 3 rounds, we'll find a TKO. And even on the feet, listen, I'm probably going to favour Kuniev on the feet, but it isn't like Blades has terrible striking. We've seen him crack people before, like Chris Daukaus on the feet, and he's quite rangy as well for this division as Curtis Blades. So I'm going Razor Blades to get this one done. Bit of a disrespectful matchmaking. I kind of feel like the UFC have done this so that if Curtis Blades beats Kuniev, that shows that Renan Ferreira losing to Kuniev was a bad look, and therefore Francis Ngannou's kind of reputation is diminished in PFL. I know it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but either way, I'm getting off track. Curtis Blades, TKO in the second round, disrespectful matchup. Rafael Fiziev versus Ignacio Bahamondes, absolute banger for the lightweight division. Now, Rafael Fiziev comes from a Muay Thai background before MMA, had a solid run with nothing but finishes on the region, on a 100% finishing rate on the regional scene in MMA. Ended up getting KO'd by Mustafaev in his UFC debut. After that, goes 2-0 with 2 decision wins. Then he ends up going on an absolute tear. Knocks out Renato Moicano, bullies Bobby Green, knocks out Brad Riddell, and then knocks out Rafael dos Santos. He gets a big fight with Justin Gaethje at UFC 286, loses a close decision. Then a main event against Gamrot, gets injured against Gamrot, and then rematched Justin Gaethje on short notice recently at UFC 313, and lost that rematch to Justin Gaethje. Going to be taking on Ignacio Bahamondes, who had quite a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Ended up losing to Preston Parsons on the regional scene, and also managed to beat Chris Brown himself. Got a good KO win in the Contender Series, lost his UFC debut, but after that, goes 3-0 in his next fight, so with 2 finishes, loses to Ludovic Klein, and then since then, just gets not 1, not 2, but 3 straight finishes in his most recent fight. He just finished Jalin Turner at UFC 313 on the same card. Fiziev's style is heavy Muay Thai, one of the best Muay Thai fighters in the UFC, just like Khalil Rountree in the main event. So if you're a fan of striking, tune into the comment in the main event because he's got a heavy Muay Thai style, heavy kicker as well. Really athletic kicker for this division is Rafael Fiziev, great defense too, and he's just explosive. He puts everything into every shot. He's going to kick you like with 100%, 100% into it. Heavy kicker, heavy Muay Thai, and that's kind of why he's managed to rise in MMA. And Ignacio Bahamondes is more of a kickboxer who utilizes high kicks. His signature move does tend to be the high kick. We've seen him put many guys out with that high kick on the Contender Series in the UFC. Great use of range as well. Very big for this division. He's huge, and he's more of a sniper. I'm going to go with Ignacio Bahamondes to win this one by decision. Yeah, I think Bahamondes gets this one done. He's looked absolutely amazing in most of his recent fights. That win over Manuel Torres is aging really well. That win over Jalin Turner, where he kind of displayed good grappling ability too. He's looked really good, he does, Ignacio Bahamondes. And another massive reason I'm picking him to fight, because they are both fairly even in the striking department, is the size. Fiziev was contemplating moving down to 145. He's a small lightweight. I thought his next fight was going to be in the featherweight division. Ignacio Bahamondes is huge. He's like a welterweight. The size differential between the two of them is going to be massive. We know that Bahamondes likes to utilize his range, and I feel like there's no better opponent to do that against than a small guy in the 155-pound division like Rafael Fiziev. I think Bahamondes gets this one done. I think he keeps Fiziev at range, picks him apart with the kickboxing. Not going to be an easy fight. It is going to be an absolute scrap. One of the best fights on the card. I'm calling it fight of the night, but I think just the size. I mean, we just saw with Phil Rowe and Angelo Uso last week, the size differential between those two. It's going to be similar between these guys. Fiziev, Bahamondes, going to be a banger. I'm going to go Ignacio Bahamondes to use his range and pick apart Rafael Fiziev with the kickboxing and gets the decision win. And then the main event, Jamahal Hill against Khalil Rountree. Now over Jamahal Hill, had a nice little run in the UFC to get his title fight with Glover Teixeira. Ends up becoming a champion by beating Glover Teixeira. Defends against Alex Pereira. Gets knocked out in the first round by Alex Pereira at UFC 300. And in his most recent fight, got put out against Yuri Prohaska as he takes on Khalil Rountree, who had not the best run in the UFC at the beginning, losing to some unranked bums. But then after that, puts together an impressive winning streak. Managed to finish Anthony Smith in the main event. Gets the title fight with Alex Pereira. Puts on one of the best fights of 2024 and an absolute fight of the year contender against Alex Pereira, but ultimately gets knocked out in the 4th round by Alex Pereira. Jamahal Hill's style is heavy pressure, likes getting people against the cage, kind of likes to always be on the front foot, looks to land a straight. We saw it against guys like OSP and Jimmy Crute. His signature move does tend to be that straight right hand, and he has got goofy footwork. Not the most technical guy, not the best footwork, but his style at base tends to be 1-2, heavy pressure. And for Khalil Rountree, heavy Muay Thai style, like I said with Rafael Fiziev, heavy Muay Thai style, arguably the best Muay Thai in the UFC right now. And he likes to break people early. He doesn't like to feel you out. He likes to get going immediately, break people with the Muay Thai, and he has got a heavy kick approach as well. Likes to blast people with kicks in the body, to the head as well, with some clip Alex Pereira with a head kick as well. And he was winning those first 2 rounds against Alex Pereira because of how of a fast starter he is. I'm going to go Khalil Rountree by TKO in the 3rd round. Yeah, Khalil Rountree massively impressed me in that fight with Alex Pereira. If we look at both of their performances against Alex, Khalil Rountree won the first 2 rounds, and Jamahal Hill got blasted by Alex. And I just feel like Khalil Rountree, this is stylistically a very favourable matchup. It's going to be on the feet. There's not going to be any grappling from either of them. And you look at some of the wins that Jamahal Hill has had, and listen, I know it's kind of ironic because we're talking about Jamahal Hill's wins, and it's not like Khalil Rountree has any impressive wins as well, but it's not like he's, like, you look at all of Jamahal Hill's wins, it's all old, washed fighters. I know neither of them, these guys have really put together any impressive wins, but I just think Khalil Rountree looks more impressive. Jamahal Hill, you know, he's just been finished by Alex and Yuri Prohaska. I don't really think he's a top fighter. I know he's a former champion, but he became a former champion from beating 42-year-old Glover Teixeira by a decision. Khalil Rountree's just had a competitive fight with Alex Pereira himself, and before that was just straight blasting people. So I think Rountree gets this one done. It is going to be close, and I'm not going to be shocked if Hill gets this one done, but I think Rountree gets the job done. Blasts Jamahal Hill early on, picks him apart with the striking, and similar to that fight with Yuri, at some point within the fight around that 3rd round, I think I'm going to see Rountree clip him and get the job done. If it does go into the later rounds, that's where I'm going to favour Jamahal Hill. We did see Khalil Rountree kind of start to break around that round 3, round 4 area against Alex Pereira, and we've seen Jamahal Hill go 5 rounds before, but I think Rountree just blasts him with the Muay Thai, gets the job done, TKOs Jamahal Hill in the 3rd round, and gets straight back into title contention. Now, some bonus predictions. I think the first bonus on the card will go to Khalil Rountree. If there is a finish in the main event, or just any impressive fight in the main event, the UFC will always give them a bonus. And because I think Khalil Rountree is going to win by finishing Jamahal Hill, undoubtedly, I think Khalil Rountree will receive a bonus on this card. The second bonus, I think, will go to Razor Blades. I think he TKOs Kuniev. You know, to debut in the UFC against Curtis Blades, who's a very dangerous guy. Some people were picking him to beat Tom Aspinall. I think he finishes Kuniev within 3, gets the job done, and will also receive a bonus. And I also think the winner of Ignacio Bahamondes and Rafael Fiziev will get a bonus. Even if there isn't a finish, I think they'll put on an absolute fight of the night, and because of that, they'll get a performance bonus. So I do think Ignacio Bahamondes being the winner will get a performance bonus against Rafael Fiziev. Now, the prospect of the card, I'm actually going to go with Oban Elliott. Now, I know that Oban Elliott hasn't looked massively impressive in all of his wins. It looks like he's going to be the next big thing, but I just think the way he carries himself, charismatic guy, if he can get another big win, another finish in his next fight against Core, I think he can become a bit of a star in the welterweight division and potentially aim for top 15 next. So I'd be keeping my eye on Oban Elliott. Improves rapidly, huge winning streak, charismatic guy. The fight of the night, like I just said, I think will be Fiziev versus Bahamondes. Two high-level, high-paced strikers in their own right with different styles. I fail to see how this is a bad matchup. They're both just get going from the get-go. That's going to be an absolute banger. And the snooze fest of the night, I think, will be Mohammad Usman versus Hamdy Abdelwahab. It's just unranked heavyweights going at it. Two very low-paced, boring heavyweights. Usman's never had a highlight reel in the UFC. Abdelwahab just had one of the most boring fights against Jamal Pokes. I don't think that's going to be entertaining. It will be a snooze fest. But those are my picks for UFC, Baku, Rountree versus Hill. Let me know if you agree, disagree with the picks. Hopefully this card isn't anywhere near as bad as the one we just had with Usman and Buckley, but only time will tell. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.